Hello and welcome to another video in the Godot series. Today I wanted to have a look at spies. In testing, spies are a way to check which methods are called if you're running a test. If you have some logic that calls another method, with a spy you can assert if that method was called and with which parameters it's called, or check if it's not called if you don't want it to be called. So let's get started. So here we have our player script with the player power script loaded in. We have some logic for walking, a very simple script to move left and right. Then we have our method to activate a random power, where we call the player powers class and get a random power. Then we match it, and with double health the add HP is called. And with flying, the add flying method is called. And here on the bottom we have a notifier that when the player leaves the boundaries of the screen, the player died method is called, and that method emits a signal of player died. That signal is picked up in our main scene script here, and it will show a game over label when the player leaves the screen. So if we press play, we can see that. We walk off the screen and it shows game over. So, spies. What I first want to do is to create a test to check if this method is called. So if this signal comes in, that the player died method is called. So let's go to our test player script, and here we have it set up. It extends the got test script. We have the player variable, and we partial double it here and create a new instance of it. And then we have our test player died. So what we can do then is player, call this method. What we would like to validate now is that when this signal would come in, we want to make sure that the player died method is called. So what we can do then is say assert called. So this is to spy on something. Then we have to say on which object we want to spy. We want to spy the player class. And then we have to say which method should be called. So here we can say method player died should have been called. So if we run this, close this, we run this, the scene itself, it will pause here, and with this you can validate that player died has been called. So if we put something else in here, so is wrong method, we would get an error saying that on the player class player died has been called, but not is wrong method. So if we test this, we rerun it, you can see here the expected is wrong method to be called wasn't the case. You can see here that the only calls made on the player class that we're testing is on visible notify screen exit and player died. So we can put this back. So we can do the same for our other methods. So let's say we want to make a more complete test of the activate random powers. So like we did last time is we have a player powers. We first have to make that a double. So we say player powers, then we have player powers, and then we can here load in player powers. I think it's called like this, player powers, and then we say player powers is player powers. So now we will put on this variable, we will put the partial double player powers. So then we can create a test for this. So test, let's say double health. And then we can create a stop for the player powers to return double health. So stop player powers And then let's see with method. Get random power is a method. So this, so get random power. And then we want it to return, I think it was called double health. Let's check that. Double health. Yes. So then we can do player get random power. Activate random power. Thanks. Activate random power. So when we call this, what will happen is this will be stopped. So it will return double health here, which means that this method will be triggered. So then we can use our spy to say assert called on the player class at HP. And that's it. Let's check it out. We run the scene and all tests passed. Now to make it more complete, we can also check the parameters being passed into the method. So here let's close the other ones. Save this and player. This one. So the add HP method is being called with a certain parameter, which is HP times 2. So when the HP is 100, it should be called with 200. So what we can say then is that it should be called with 200. So now we say make sure that the player add HP method is called with the parameter 200. So let's see if that works. And that works too. So with that you can more precise test if the methods that you want to be called, or the methods that you want to make sure that were called with the right parameters. And for example, what we can also do is to say that when double health is the random power, we want to make sure that add flying is not called. So to do that, we can say assert not called on the player. And we want to make sure that the add flying method is not called. So now it will validate that this is called with this method and this parameter, and this is make sure that it's not calling the add flying method on player. So let's play the scene. And here you can see that it works. So all the tests are passing. If we, for example, would say player died, which is another method, it would still pass because that is also not being called. But if we would then say, let's say another method is called, so as a bad example, let's say activate random power is not called, which is of course called because we called it ourselves. But if we play the scene then, it will give you an error message saying expected activate random power to not be called, but it has been called. If you look at the call stack, activate random power was called first, and then add HP with 200 was called. So to continue on Spies, we can also add a call counter. So if we want to make sure that the player only gets the add HP once, so it only gets the double HP once, we want to make sure that it only calls this method once, because let's say we would call this method twice. Let's say we do this, and we didn't have our parameter, then this method, this test will pass even though the add HP was called twice, and we might not want that. So as you can see here, the test passes because indeed the add HP was called, but it was called multiple times. So to guard against that, we can make an assert call count on the player with the add HP, and it should be called once. So if we run our scene now, it will fill because we called the add HP twice. and we expected add_hp to be called 1 times, but it was called 2 times. And as you can see here, these 2 methods were called. So then to fix that, we have to remove this. And then if we run it, it pauses again. So to summarize, we have the assert called to see which method is called. We can add the parameters to make sure that it was called with the right parameters. Then we have the assert not called to make sure that a method isn't called. And then we have the assert call count to make sure that the method is called the amount of times you want it to. So that's how you can use Spies in Godot. I hope you liked it. Have a nice day.